All right, you guys, I'm going to do another Q&A. You guys keep dropping some good questions, so as long as you keep sending in the questions, I'm just going to keep these Q&As going. Also, if there's somebody specific that you want me to do a profile on, drop it in the comment section. Or if there's any kind of ideas or anything that you guys want me to get into, go ahead and shoot me your ideas. It helps. I come up with some of these topics, but I mean, if you guys got something you want me to specifically talk about, just put it in the comment section. So let's get straight to it. Alfonso Sorazano wants to know, what happened to Dreamer, the one involved with the hit on Brown Bob? Is he still active? No, Dreamer didn't even make it out of the county jail on good standings after he got picked up on that case for killing Brown Bob in Bethel. The only one who left the county jail still active was Chuco, Antonio Guillen. Dreamer and Bad Boy both made incriminating statements, and even though they both tried to clean it up later, it didn't work. In fact, Bad Boy even attempted to sabotage Chuco's status and take him down with him, but he failed at this too. While Bad Boy was on the 4th floor in the Santa Clara County Jail, he called the district attorney and tried to pass himself off as being Chuco. He told the district attorney that his life was in danger and that he needed to be moved to PC. That's some cold shit right there, man. The only problem with his plan was that he mispronounced Chuco's last name when he identified himself. He pronounced his last name as Gillen with hard L's instead of the way it should have been pronounced as Guillen with silent L's. The DA thought it was suspicious that Chuco would mispronounce his own last name. So after some investigating, the DA found out that Bad Boy was the one out at that time for his hour of rec time when the call was made. Dreamer is currently at the Salinas Valley State Prison on an SMY. So Steven Erickson wants to know, if C's had 1 week, was Lencho given leniency? I'm assuming you meant in reference to the yard exercise routine, correct? Meaning that all NF members had 1 week to get themselves up to par with the group Machina. Lencho never worked out due to health issues. He could have, but he played off of his chronic hepatitis C. And this was an excuse that this cat used for years. He claimed his hepatitis C was so bad that it caused him excruciating pain in his liver. The funny thing about it is that he would literally limp out to the yard and would sometimes be doubled over in pain grabbing his liver. This is an act he would put on before the Machina, but as soon as we finished busting down, those pains would mysteriously go away and he'd be good for the rest of the day. Straight fucking dirtbag. That's what he used to do. As long as I knew him, that was his get down. He never busted down. I don't even think that fool could do a push-up, man. So Listo on the go wants to know, is it true that Lencho's own son made statements against him and that his younger brother Joker is also on bad standings? Yes, Lencho's own son made incriminating statements against him and against other members who functioned in Lencho's regiment. In fact, Lencho's son, Danny Guzman, who's pictured, and Lencho's sister, Stephanie, were both indicted with Lencho. His son, Danny, burned him up and cooperated with the district attorney to help himself out. Lencho's ex-wife, Debbie Corrales, who's also pictured, agreed to wear a wire and took down Lencho's entire regiment. One by one, she reeled him in and fed him to the sharks. As far as Lencho's little brother, Joker, or Greg Guzman, who's also pictured, the little bald-headed fat guy, yes, he is also on bad standings and is no longer active. So it's pretty safe to say that the entire family is somewhat dysfunctional. But Marco Sanchez wants to know, hey Boxer, has your homie Chewy from your hood ever done Fed time? No, as far as I know, Chewy's never done Fed time. He's only done state time. So Zap Zuda wants to know, what is the stupidest reason you had ever witnessed or heard where a member was either deemed no good, removed, or perhaps killed during your tenure? Shit. I have no shortage of answers for that question, but I'll just give you a few. As far as killed, I'd have to say that situation that played out with my mentor, Mikio Castillo, was probably the stupidest and most unjust reason for seeing a member get killed. Deemed no good, it happens all the time over personal feelings, personal vendettas, and personal agendas. But I think one of the ones that jumps out at me is what happened to George Lucky Mendoza from San Jose. He was an NF member who was deemed no good and then sliced up because of his involvement with a female named Mommy, who used to be involved with another NF member, Ponyboy Maris, who was doing life in the feds. The relationship was consensual and she wasn't even involved with this other cat anymore. But because this was Skip's boy, a high-ranking NF member, Lucky was hit just based on this principle alone. Removed for a stupid reason. Another situation that comes to mind is the one that I mentioned in my book that I actually took part in. At the time, I was just a young NR member, 21 years old, and was only following orders, but I was directed to hit a northerner, Sapo from Oakland, for giving a Sureño a light. This happened in Susanville at a time when smoking was permitted and when they used to pass out books of matches. The OA, overall authority, Geronimo Cadena from Soledad, had us hit Sapo because he gave the Sureño some matches to light a cigarette. In his mind, he threatened our security for passing materials to an enemy that could have been used against us. I guess because with fire, you can burn plastic and make a knife. Talk about a stretch of the imagination. So Jay Ables wants to know, I hope I pronounced your name right, man. In your book, you mentioned somebody from King City. If you can you speak up on him and how he was the only one who was going to assist you on the yard to remove someone? Yeah, so the individual you were referring to was Fabian Zavala from King City. This was a solid homeboy. In fact, he was the one who also assisted me in removing Sapo from Oakland that I spoke about in the last comment. In a nutshell, this is what happened. And Norteño had just got blasted on the yard in Susanville. Everyone knew it. Everyone knew we couldn't just let it go, and everyone knew what needed to be done, but nobody was volunteering to take the honors. So I raised my hand and agreed to hit a specific target. That much was understood. However, there were other NR members there that were able and that should have been sent to go with me. If for nothing more, they should have just came with me, considering the fact that the target I was going to hit stayed surrounded with his own security. But again, nobody wanted to get involved. Fabian had just hit the yard a day or two prior to this. When I went to retrieve the weapon off the weight pile, Fabian asked who was going with me. I told him I was flying solo. He was like, "No, you're not. I'm gonna roll with you." When we got to the hole after the first incident, that's when we were both directed to hit Sapo. Never ran into Fabian again or heard anything else about him since we were in Susanville in 1990. But he was a solid homeboy who never hesitated. So Melina Zaba wants to know, why in the feds there ain't no green light on the Bulldogs and it's different in the States? Different politics. You would think that the green light would definitely extend to the federal system because it's not always like that. But it's not always like that. Especially because the federal system doesn't change the affiliation issues that led to the Bulldogs getting the green light put on them in the first place. But like I said, different circumstances, different politics. So Jeffrey Lawrence wants to know, you mentioned David Rocha in your book, briefly talking a little bit about his rap album. He had a very powerful impact on young Chicanos and other races up and down the West Coast, even in Washington State. Can you elaborate more as to why the NF thought rap music would be a powerful tool? He even wrote a book on his life story called Lost in the Storm. Would you be interested in reading it on your channel, or perhaps maybe be willing to interview him? There's multiple questions here, so let me just jump on the easy ones first. Yes, I'm aware of the fact that he wrote a book. However, I'm not sure about reading it. Aside from the copyright issues that could be involved, I'm not sure he even wants his book read. It's something to consider though. As far as interviewing him, I haven't quite expanded my horizons that far yet. But again, interviewing or going live is also something that I've been thinking about. As far as me elaborating on why the NF thought that rap music was a powerful tool, because it was. And it still is. It's a way, or like you said, it's a tool, a propaganda tool to spread its message to the masses. Dino just became one of the many vehicles that the NF utilized to push an agenda. The NF realized the potential in this just like anyone else did. At that time, our agenda was to use Norteño rap as a sounding board to cease all red-on-red infighting, to unite the Norteño following, and then to bring them together for a common purpose, to combat the invasion of Sureño-based street gangs in Northern California. What better way to facilitate these mandates directly to the masses, and what better way or faster way to do it than to facilitate it almost instantly through rap music? The NF was evolving at that time, and although it doesn't traditionally make a practice out of putting its business directly out there on Front Street, these were considered to be quandaries that needed to be dealt with immediately, even if that meant breaking some of its own norms. Here goes Zab Zuda again. So Zab Zuda wants to know, during your tenure, which member was the most business savvy and brought in a lot of money to the organization? What was the most you'd ever seen contributed? Ideally, how was the money supposed to be distributed, and who is in charge of that? Is X amount set aside for members' bail? Do members get some money when getting out? Some go to commissary, etc. God damn, man. You keep coming up, but you keep posing some of the best questions. Again, this is a multi-part question, so let me get the easy stuff out the way first. Theoretically, the money generated from the streets is supposed to get siphoned back into the main bank so that portions of it can be divvied up and allocated to the less fortunate. Basically, the guys who are normally doing life and who can no longer support themselves, due in part because all their resources either died off or dried up, which is no fault of their own. But this is a smokescreen. There is no trickle-down effect. There's a trickle-up effect, and this money is controlled and distributed to those at the top of the food chain. Like you said, it's supposed to be for commissary, appliances, etc., but that just don't happen. Attorney retainers are supposed to be the responsibility of the regimental commanders, but this too is a farce. Each regiment has its own bank that's capped off at 10,000, and this is controlled by the RC, the regimental commander. It's supposed to be for lawyer retainers, investments, loans, and for whatever materials are needed in order to break new ground. But once you get busted and are no longer in a position to be productive, you become a liability, just another hungry mouth to feed. I don't want to sound like I'm stroking my own ego or that I'm being arrogant, but all bullshit aside, in 2004, my regiment was probably one, if not the most productive. I started contributing anywhere from 10 to 15,000 every 2 weeks. And this wasn't even including our commission. I was about as business savvy as you could get. I had a limousine business that we were running our dirty money through, cleaning the books, or basically money laundering. I had a sophisticated counterfeiting operation going that was netting thousands of dollars, and we were working with the Gulf cartel, moving 10 to 20 pounds of crystal a week. The Salinas regiment was another regiment that generated tens of thousands of dollars. I don't like giving Smiley and Lobo credit because of how dirty they were, but Mike Eo broke ground out there and made it possible for even these cats to operate one of the most productive regiments out there. Again, Zab Zuda wants to know, would an MA type structure, no organizational hierarchy, work for the NF in the current times? Or there has to be generals, Cat 1, 2, etc. for that organization in order to thrive today? What's your opinion on having a hierarchy versus non-hierarchy, and which do you feel is better? Well, I've always functioned under the type of paramilitary structure that the NF functioned under, so I think I'm biased. No, seriously, I think you have to have a chain of command in order to maintain order and equilibrium. That's why the NF has been effective and successful in some of the street ventures it has invested in. When you have a pecking order and all the parts are working in sync, the whole machine operates more smoothly. If the NF scrapped its ranking and hierarchy structure and attempted to function without that structure, I think it would crumble. Organization and structure is credited for its success. The BGF is a good example. Under George Jackson, the BGF functioned fluidly and was able to maintain strict order. But when he died and the BGF lost their way, it kind of fell apart and order was almost impossible to control. The same thing would happen to the NF. You have too many chiefs running around, and this invites dissidence and discord. With this type of disorganization, you'd have too many people bumping heads and jostling for political position. Goddamn, Zab Zuda. Let's just do a Zab Zuda Q&A. All these questions are from Zab Zuda. You ever meet Diablo from NF? Was he also a high-ranking member, and what was your interaction with him? Yes, I knew Diablo. I was in the shoe with him in Pelican Bay. High-ranking? No, he's overrated. I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just saying that because I've often heard about him being spoken on in the context of being a former high-ranking leader. I was housed with him in C2 for about 10 months. He was celled up with Rudy from Visalia, and I was celled up with Big Rock from Salinas. Myself and Big Rock were the porters in our pods, so my interaction with Diablo was almost on a daily basis. After we clean the pod, I stand in front of his cell and we chop it up for sometimes an hour or two. Most of the time we spent talking about some of the schooling topics we were both working on. His real name is Dimas De Leon, and he's from Tracy. Other than that, he was a real cool cat though. Real laid back and always had a positive attitude. I say that because up there in the shoe, you run across a lot of grumpy, miserable ass dudes that wear a sour look on their face all day and who just basically stay mad at the world. Pelican Bay make you like that, man. Pelican Bay can make you antisocial if you let it. But he was one of them cool dudes that was always in good spirits. Ah, damn. Zab Zuda. How come there's a lot less Northerners versus Southerners in the pen? Is that because gangbanging is less prominent up north? More opportunities up north, therefore less need for Northerners to commit crimes? I wouldn't say that. I think that's a generalization or a stereotypical way of looking at it. I don't think gangbanging is all Northerners or Southerners do to get themselves sent to the joint. In fact, I bet that probably a small number of them go to prison for the specific act of gangbanging per se. Some of it definitely has to be attributed to geography. With Mexico right at their backs, why wouldn't there be more of a dense population of Hispanics from Southern California? Northern California is a mixed bag of diversity, and there's not one big area out here that's dense or has a dense population of Hispanics like there is in LA or San Diego. There's several factors that contribute to this, but Northerners have always been a minority in prison. So Ruthless 12th Street wants to know, or he basically wants to make a point. I'm from San Bernardino. There is no NF. If there is, they definitely not active. Okay. This is in response to my last Q&A, so I guess he's responding to a question that I had answered about NF being down south. So I'm assuming this is a response to my last Q&A where I said there was probably small pockets of NF members functioning out there in places like San Bernardino, Ontario, Pasadena, etc., etc. I don't know if you're just trying to make a point, if you're just trying to represent San Bernardino or what it is, but let me just say this. I'm not trying to say that there's NF out there that are blowing up your set or who are out there blatantly exposing themselves. All I'm saying is this. You obviously can't keep tabs on every single individual who lives in San Bernardino, and there's just no way possible that your reconnaissance is just that good. If there is, NF crews functioning out there, they're flying low below the radar and they're trying to be incognito. To put themselves out there on Front Street and let their presence be known would be analogous to committing suicide, don't you think? I mean, how would you possibly know if there were a crew of 5 or 6 NF members out there networking and working together? How would you know if they passed you on the street? There's no way you could. We're not talking about gangbangers who wear hairnets, khakis, and red rags in their back pockets. Come on now, we're talking about dudes that don't dress like gangbangers and dudes who are just out there making money. Dudes that identify with being in the organized crime. We don't all wear Stan Smiths, Dickies, and bald heads, man. Just like there's a lot of MA members out here in Northern California who are operating on the down low and who are tapping into the financial ventures that Northern California has to offer, Southern California ain't no different in that regard. Jeffrey Perea wants to know, what's the name of the podcast? It's called Shot Callers. You have to go on Perplex TV and then punch it in the search bar. So keep calm and love God wants to know, or again, wants to make a statement. Is it true people get converted all the time just off the strength of feelings they already had inside and the Holy Spirit leading them? Other than that, you claim the NF wouldn't send someone to hit him, meaning David Rocha, for no reason, but that was a slick answer. But that's not the whole point of your book was about, was that it was happening to you. And keep in mind, I'm typing out these questions exactly how they're written in the comment section. So this shit's all jumbled up. It's not my typos, man. It's the way that these guys are putting in their questions. I obviously didn't type out your whole question, just what was relevant to what you were asking. As to the first part of your question, I guess some people do get converted off of their own feelings, their hardships, and then of course, as you said, the spirit leading them. I'm personally not religious, but I've seen many take that route, so I guess there is some truth to it. As far as the second part of your question, listen, it ain't no mystery, man. Since you referenced my book, I'm just gonna assume you read it. And if you did, then you obviously had to understand that it wasn't just as simple as me falling into bad standings for no reason at all. If this is what you got from reading the book, then you missed it. I never once said I was just an innocent victim in my book, nor did I ever say that they just decided to deem me no good for no reason. What you missed was that people jumped to the conclusion about what they thought I was doing and that they never gave me the benefit of the doubt. And truth be told, I wasn't completely innocent. I made phone calls that got me in hot water, but my point all along is that at that time, it didn't rise to the level of deeming me over, nor did it meet the criteria of putting me in bad standings. So it was a little more complicated than you obviously understood. As far as Dino, I didn't give any slick answer, and it wasn't no trickery either. It's real simple, like Tupac once said, follow me, man, follow me. I stand completely behind what I said when I said that. The NF didn't just send someone to Dino for no reason. Why would they? Because they just like hitting people, or because they just have the manpower to send at someone like Dino? Trust me, there was a reason. That just wasn't articulated. Whether it was because they thought he was telling or because he just decided to convert and lay it down, I don't know. I wasn't there, so I can't speak on it. All I do know is that it's not our practice to just randomly pick out someone and then victimize them just because we ain't got nothing else better to do. All I was saying is that there seemed like there was more to the story and that something was being left out. So U2F wants to know, I have a question, Boxer. Do you live in hiding or are you living a regular life out in the open? Yes, I live a regular life, and for the most part, I do all the everyday things that everyone else does out there. I go to the grocery store, I go to Walmart, I go to Lowe's, I go to restaurants, I work a normal truck driving job, etc., etc. When I had to grapple and come to terms with some of the hard choices that I had to make, this is something I thought about and considered before I moved forward with making those choices. I told myself that if I wasn't willing to just go out there and live a normal life and settle into a life of normalcy, then I wasn't going to do it. I didn't want to live my life like that, and I vowed not to. Don't get me wrong, I'm not just walking around acting like the threat doesn't exist either. I'm not stupid, because I used to be one of those guys who would go out there looking for dropouts and hermits. But I just refused to live like a paranoid schizophrenic, consumed with fear and always looking over my shoulder. Besides, I'm a firm believer in fate, and I believe that the course of destiny can't be altered. In other words, I believe that if something's supposed to happen, then it's gonna happen no matter where I lay my head or where I decide to live my life. So Pyro Gen 4 wants to know, why didn't David Rocha get a green light? Man, fucking Sir Dino's famous, man. I'm not sure that he did anything that would have warranted a green light. I can't be 100% positive either way because I wasn't there. I only heard bits and pieces that were relevant to his situation, so I'm not going to speculate, but I will say this. Some might say that just based on the fact that he was an active functioning Northerner at the time, he got caught up in Operation Black Widow, that he was held to certain standards and that it wasn't okay for him to just wake up one day and say, you know what? I welcome God into my life and now I'm a Christian. Some might say that this is analogous to laying it down or dropping out. However, others might have a different opinion and say he wasn't obligated to the NF. He's entitled to give his life to God if that's what he wants to do. And as long as he's not doing anything that could be considered detrimental or opposing to the organization, he's more than welcome to do as he pleases. I'm sure people looked at it differently, but from what I was told, this is what happened. When David was in Santa Rita fighting this case, he either wrote or personally spoke to Henry Big Happy Cervantes from Lodi, who was a high-ranking NF leader and who was also there in Santa Rita fighting this case too. David apparently told told Big Happy what his intentions were, and instead of imposing his will on him, Big Happy apparently told him, you know what, David, you're not obligated to the NF. You're not even obligated to the NR. So if that's what you want to do, you're more than free to do it. Just don't do nothing that could be considered as opposing to us, and I give you my word, you'll be okay. Big Happy basically gave David his blessings, so that pretty much squashed the issue right there. And this is apparently why he wasn't moved on. So Colonel Sander wants to know, what happened to Yogi Pinell? On August 12, 2015, Yogi Pinell was stabbed and killed in Folsom State Prison by members of the Aryan Brotherhood. Pinell was targeted by the Aryan Brotherhood because he was a leader of a rival gang, the Black Guerrilla Family, the BGF. He was also targeted because of his ties to a 1960s revolutionary movement that was referred to as the San Quentin Six. The San Quentin Six were given their name following a foiled escape attempt that left 6 dead, several of which were correctional officers that had their throats slit. The two who actually committed the killing were Waylon Pitchford, 38, and Jason Weaver, who was also 38. Weaver was charged with stabbing Pinell 19 times while Pitchford laid on top of him and held him down. This was a planned and coordinated hit that was also assisted by several Sureño inmates who at the time had a loose alliance with the ABs. While Pitchford and Weaver committed the killing, a large group of Sureños created a scrimmage so that nobody could stop the murder or render any assistance to Pinell. Almost a year after the murder was committed, 16 members, also included 6 high-ranking leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood, were indicted on a litany of charges that included Pinell's murder along with 4 others. An attorney was also charged in the indictment with aiding a criminal enterprise and for bringing in drugs and cell phones. The ABs apparently used the cell phones to send encrypted messages to some of their associates, ordering specific murders like the one involving Pinell. Despite the fact that this murder was committed at the peak of the massive shoe release and during what was supposed to be at a time when the 4 major prison gangs had agreed to a standstill, Pinell's death was never avenged, and this soldier was allowed to be taken out without any retribution. That was a goddamn shame, man. So Johnny B. Goods, he doesn't want to ask a question. He wants to clarify something, and he wants to make a statement. Johnny B. Goods says, just to clarify, we do not function with SNY PCs, period. All lower levels are separated. All PCs are on site, period. They are not integrating trash on any levels with active ends, Southsiders, or whites. If you want facts and not false rumors, that's fact. The cease of hostilities do not extend to PC, SNY. The OGs who did 20 or 30 years plus years and remain loyal to their beliefs are not now all of a sudden in fear to return. Talking about the SHU program. This is in reference to my last Q&A. That's clarification and truth. On PC, SNY mixing with active ends, Southsiders, whites, won't happen. Okay. God damn, Johnny, be good. I really wish I could agree with your assessment with facts and clarification, but unfortunately, you're either out of the loop or you're ill-informed. I wouldn't just generate this type of information if it wasn't standing firmly on facts itself. I wouldn't even do it just for the sake of spreading false propaganda, because I'd look pretty stupid if I was putting out misinformation. Everything you outlined, it sounded real good, and that's exactly what I would expect to hear from people who are out there on these yards. However, here's the problem with that. I routinely speak to about 5 or 6 of my old co-defendants who are all on different SNYs, and they have all told me that they started merging the level 1 and 2 yards together. PCs and those who proclaim to be active. All of them have told me about active individuals that they've been putting out there on these SNYs, and that they've even had conversations with them. These individuals stated that they moved them from active yards to these 50-50 yards as part of a pilot program that CDCR has been implementing. When asked, what's going to happen to you when you go to another yard and you tell your homeboys you were out here, they apparently know that they'll now be considered no good. So whether these guys are being told to take off on site is not what's relevant. What's relevant is that they're not doing it, and 90% of them stay in program. Those are the facts. This ain't a myth. This is happening right now. If you think that most of these guys are taking flight on sight, you're in denial, because that's not what's happening. But don't take my word for it. Look into it more yourself. S&Y yards and active yards, at least for level 1s and 2s, are a thing of the past. One of my boys has a wife who is a correctional sergeant, and she also validated this new CDCR policy. I think more cats are opting the program than you might want to believe. Now, those are the facts, and that's clarification right there. You can even hear some of these stories on that other YouTube channel, Stories by a Prisoner, and a lot of them cats confirm this as well. Everyone knows what's going to happen if they try it on level 3 and 4 yards, and that's why they haven't done it yet. But as far as the 1s and 2s, you could pretty much stick a fork in them cats, man, because they're as good as done. So Devontrez Haynes wants to know, hey Boxer, I'm not sure if this question has been asked before, but in all your years of functioning, did you ever think you would be on YouTube talking about your former life to thousands of strangers? Hell no, man. That's an easy one to answer. Hell no, I never envisioned that I'd be on YouTube openly talking about the NF or my former life within that organization. If I would have, then I obviously would have envisioned myself falling into bad standings, and that's something that never happened. I'm not sure how familiar you are with my story, but I wasn't one of them dudes that was just able to turn it off from 1 minute to the next. There's a lot of guys who were able to do that, but I wasn't one of them. It took me almost 5 years to make those choices, and that didn't even come easy. In retrospect, when I look back on where I used to be and how I was one of the biggest advocates against all the things that I would later become. I was one of those C's that would be out there on those exercise yards, educating these ends and instilling the NF belief system into their young minds. I remember telling them, never count yourselves amongst that trash, those weak motherfuckers who go crawling on their bellies to lick them cops' boots because they got weak and sold their souls. I mean, I used to despise these guys who used to do that type of shit, and if given a chance, I would have stabbed them in a heartbeat. So no, I never fathomed that I'd ever take that route or that I'd ever be doing what I am now. And don't get me wrong, I'm not promoting the snitch agenda. I never will. I hope nobody ever has to go through some of the things that I did. It's grimy and there's no way of prettying it up or making it right. But hopefully some of these guys who see what happened to me will stop glorifying that lifestyle and will make better decisions. Otherwise, when they get in that situation and they're faced with the same set of circumstances or that same type of adversity, then they better be willing to accept the consequences and walk in those shoes that they chose to walk in. So Robert Campos wants to know, what do you think about these young Northerners in their teens and 20s nowadays compared to the Northerners from the 90s in your era? It's a whole different breed. I don't know what you call this generation. Maybe the millennials or the skinny jean generation. I don't know, man. But they're not the Pepsi generation or the generation before that. But it's definitely not the same caliber. I'm not just saying this because it was my era and I feel like I need to talk them up. But my generation was a lot different. We looked at the world from a different kind of lens. I took my commitment to the NR and the NF serious, and I was willing to kill and die for it. That kill mentality that we adopted from the 70s and 80s fizzled out and completely died by the millennium. Before, when we used to hit our targets, we used to think about some of the faster ways to kill them, how to take their win. Nowadays, these guys aren't even thinking about taking anyone's win. They call it exactly what it is, removals. Now they run up with the razor, slice you a few times, give you a couple haymakers, and it's over. Their objective is to basically just get you off the tier, to remove you. Back in my era, we were not only deep, but the morale was peaking. The Norteño spirit burned strong within some of our hearts. Nowadays, it just seems like nobody's taking it serious anymore. And the fear that we once commanded on the streets is almost non-existent now. Nobody fears these criminal organizations or even takes them serious anymore. Even the way these guys are schooled is different now. Now they think it's cool to use ebonics when they talk. They completely lost sight of their roots and they think it's cool to wear skinny jeans. Fucking discouraging. Angie Garcia, the dumbest question. So you say, do you ever miss prison life? Who the fuck does? No, prima. That's not a dumb question at all. The only dumb question is the one that's not asked. I think I just answered the same question in my last Q&A, but since it's you, I'll touch on it again. No, there's nothing about prison I miss. Having your freedoms taken away from you is something that I think nobody would miss. Having spent almost 23 years in prison is enough for me. I can honestly say that there's nothing about those places I miss. Nothing. But like I said in my other reply, I can remember a time back in my 20s when I was so institutionalized that I honestly felt like I wanted and needed to go back to prison. I didn't know how to function out in society, and I just didn't know how to handle the transition. It was like going from one world to another, and I almost couldn't deal with it. I locked myself inside my hotel room the second day after getting out, and I just felt like I needed to go back. Drinking alcohol became one of my coping mechanisms. It helped me relax and calm down. If I ever experienced an anxiety attack in life, I'd have to say that that's when it happened right there. The shoe has that type of effect on you. PTSD is a condition that a lot of guys come out with. I had to go through this same transition every time I paroled, and it wasn't fun. But now, years later, after having removed myself from those places and after having experienced a different kind of life, or a different side of life, like walking on the beaches of Cabo San Lucas, Hawaii, St. Kitts, and other unbelievable places, I can honestly say that prison is the last place I ever want to go back to. So Sarah and the Miguelites wants to know, can you elaborate on how many carnales were actually in the NF when you were pulled? I can't give you an exact number, but back in the early to mid 90s, we were deep. If I was going to guesstimate, I'd say it was anywhere from 350 to 400. This includes state prison, federal prison, and the streets. And this is a conservative number. Keep in mind, this is before there were hundreds, if not thousands of dropouts. Back then, it would be an unusual occurrence if there was more than 4 or 5 dropouts in the entire East Block. Dropping out back then was taboo, and it just wasn't something that was common as it is now. The screening process to get into the NF was also a lot more rigorous and thorough too. It's not like it is today where they're just basically recruiting anyone and everyone raises their hand. Back then, the NF strived for quality over quantity. Nowadays, they're recruiting anyone, including the bottom feeders and the mud suckers. Again, Sarah and the Miguelites wants to know, sup boxer, did you do time with any Northerners from Corporate, California? Bernius was involved in killing Brown Bob. Can you elaborate on what happened to him? As to the first part of your question, yeah, I've done time with several Northerners from Corcoran, but it's been over the years, and unfortunately, I've forgotten most of their names. As far as Bad Boy or Bernius, I already gave a spill on him in my first question, so hopefully that's what you were looking for. So Big Moose wants to know, can you speak about the 3 generals that were in place before Pinky, Corny, and Tibbs? How and when they came into power? Did you know any of these 3 personally? Keep in mind that the structure of the NF's hierarchy has changed over the years. Back when Babo was running the organization single-handedly, Babo was called the Nuestro General, or the Supreme Commander. Then he had his captains, lieutenants, etc., etc. Then Black Bob reorganized the group under the same type of paramilitary structure and eliminated the Supreme Commander position because of what they learned from Babo's reign, that delegating that much power to one single individual invited corruption and an abuse of power. That's after Babo was impeached. Black Bob established the Mesa, or table, which is a council that governed together and used a voting system to implement major changes. The OGB, organizational governing body, was also part of this leadership structure, which included Brown Bob from Morgan Hill, pictured, Rafa from Fresno, Big Chente, who's also pictured, Vincent Arroyo from Chino, who's in the red jumpsuit with the thick mustache, then DC from Chino, who's also pictured, and Cuete from Tulare County was also pictured. Those were some of the individuals that were part of the OGB. There were others, but those are some of the main ones. When Big Chente defected, a new leadership structure was adopted that included 3 generals, a general council, and an inner council. Pinky and Tibbs were appointed as 2 of those generals, and when Big Chente defected, Corny from Woodland was the next general voted in. That concludes the Q&A. Like I said, you guys keep your questions coming, man, and I'm going to keep doing these Q&As.